The sun was a burning ember in the vast sky, casting its golden rays over an endless expanse of desert. Dust swirled around her boots as she trudged through the arid land, her face hidden beneath a tattered shawl. Her hands were calloused from years of hard work, but they trembled now, not from fear, but from exhaustion. She had been walking for hours, maybe days, under the scorching heat with nothing but the stars to guide her when night fell. Until that moment, she thought she was alone. But then, a low groan broke the silence of the desert. It wasn't human. It was deeper, more guttural, like the sound of an animal in pain. She stopped in her tracks, her heart pounding against her ribs. The noise came again, closer this time. Peering into the distance, she saw it. A mule lying on its side by a cluster of dry sagebrush. Its legs twitched faintly, and blood seeped from a wound near its shoulder. Little did she know this injured creature would change everything. She hesitated only for a moment before approaching cautiously. The mule's eyes flickered open as she knelt beside it, filled with both pain and distrust. "Don't worry," she murmured softly, though whether she spoke to comfort herself or the animal, she couldn't say. Using what little water she carried in her canteen, she cleaned the wound as best she could. The mule flinched but didn't try to escape, perhaps too weak to resist. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, she decided to stay. There was no shelter nearby, no ranch or town within miles. All she had was the barren landscape and the injured mule. Wrapping herself in her shawl, she curled up next to the animal, using its warmth as her own makeshift blanket. Sleep claimed her quickly, heavy and dreamless. When dawn broke, the world seemed different. The air carried a crispness that hadn't been there the night before, and the mule's breathing sounded steadier. Relief washed over her as she realized her efforts hadn't been in vain. But as she stood to stretch her sore muscles, something caught her eye, a shadow moving in the distance. At first, she thought it might be another traveler, someone passing through who wouldn't give her a second glance. But as the figure drew nearer, she noticed others behind it. Men on horseback, their silhouettes stark against the rising sun. Fear gripped her chest. They weren't just travelers. They wore uniforms, the blue fabric unmistakable even from afar. Soldiers. Her mind raced. What business did soldiers have out here? And why were they heading straight toward her? Refusing to panic, she grabbed her belongings and backed away slowly, keeping her eyes on the approaching riders. The mule stirred at her movement, lifting its head weakly. She glanced back at it, torn between staying and running. In the end, she chose neither. Instead, she stayed rooted to the spot, watching as the soldiers dismounted their horses mere yards away. One of them stepped forward, his boots crunching against the gravel. His face was stern, lines etched deep from years of service. "Ma'am," he began, his voice gruff yet respectful, "we've been tracking reports of unusual activity in these parts. Can you tell us what you're doing out here?" She swallowed hard, searching for words. I was traveling west," she lied, hoping her voice wouldn't betray her. "Found this mule last night. Thought I'd help." The soldier studied her carefully, his gaze sharp. Then, without warning, he turned to one of his men and nodded. "Search the area," he ordered. "Make sure there's nothing we're missing." Unbelievable dread settled in her stomach as the soldiers spread out, combing the surrounding desert. She wanted to protest, to demand answers, but instinct told her to remain silent. Minutes stretched into eternity as they dug through rocks and overturned bushes. Finally, one of them called out, holding up a small object, a metal box, rusted and weathered. "Captain," he shouted, "you need to see this." The captain approached, taking the box from his subordinate. He examined it closely, his expression unreadable. When he opened it, whatever he saw inside made his jaw tighten. He looked at her then, not with suspicion, but with something else entirely, recognition. "You don't belong here," he said quietly, almost to himself. Before she could respond, another soldier rode up, his horse lathered in sweat. "Sir, we found something else, a cabin about half a mile east. Smoke coming from the chimney." "A cabin?" She froze, confusion clouding her thoughts. There was no cabin, not that she knew of. Anyway, but then little did she know, the truth was buried far deeper than anyone imagined. The soldiers formed a line, their horses restless, as they prepared to ride toward the mysterious structure. The captain motioned for her to follow. Reluctantly, she obeyed, her mind spinning with questions. Who lived in that cabin? Why hadn't she seen it during her trek across the desert? As they neared the location, the sight of the cabin became clearer. A modest wooden structure nestled among sparse trees, smoke curling lazily from its chimney. A sense of unease crept over her as they surrounded the building, weapons drawn. The captain knocked firmly on the door, his voice carrying authority. "Open up, Federal forces." Silence answered him. No footsteps, no voices. Just stillness. After several tense moments, the captain gave the signal to enter. The door swung open easily, revealing a dim interior lit only by the dying embers of fire. Furniture was scattered haphazardly, as if someone had left in a hurry. On the table lay papers, some burned at the edges, others smeared with ink, and then there was a portrait hanging crookedly on the wall. A man, dressed in formal attire, his smile warm and inviting. Beneath the image, written in faded script, were the words, "To my beloved daughter." Her breath hitched. That face, it was familiar, too familiar. Suddenly, the captain's earlier words echoed in her mind. Asterisk, "You don't belong here." Asterisk, buried within those documents, hidden among the chaos, was a name she recognized instantly. It was hers. Tears welled in her eyes as realization dawned. This wasn't just any cabin. It belonged to her father, a man she hadn't seen since childhood, a man who, according to whispers in the town she'd passed through, had ties to outlaw gangs and secret dealings with Confederate spies. Crying silently, she sank to her knees, overwhelmed by emotions she couldn't name. Betrayal, anger, sorrow, they all collided within her chest, leaving her breathless. But then, another twist unfolded. Among the papers, the soldiers discovered correspondence detailing plans for a massive uprising, an attempt to overthrow Union forces stationed in the region. Plans that implicated not only her father, but also countless others involved in the rebellion. In that moment, she understood why the soldiers had come, why they had tracked her movements, why they had searched so thoroughly. Because she wasn't just a poor girl who stumbled upon an injured mule. She was a piece of a much larger puzzle, one that threatened to unravel the fragile peace of the Wild West. As the sun set once more, casting long shadows over the desert, the soldiers took their leave, promising protection while investigations continued. She remained behind, staring at the portrait of her father, her heart heavy with unanswered questions. For now, the storm had passed. But deep down, she knew it was only the beginning. The night fell swiftly, swallowing the desert in darkness. The soldiers had departed, their hoofbeats fading into the distance, leaving her alone with the cabin and its secrets. She sat by the fire, clutching a worn blanket around her shoulders, the warmth from the flames barely reaching her skin. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, carrying with it the scent of dust and dry wood. The stars above twinkled faintly, their light dimmed by the thick clouds gathering on the horizon. She reached for one of the papers scattered across the table, her fingers trembling as she unfolded it. The handwriting was familiar, her father's. Each stroke of the pen carried his essence, his voice whispering through the lines. He spoke of hope, of freedom, but also of sacrifice. Sacrifices he believed were necessary for a cause greater than himself. Yet, beneath the noble rhetoric lay hints of desperation, of a man cornered and running out of options. Her heart ached with conflicting emotions. Part of her wanted to believe in the man she remembered, a kind father who taught her to ride horses and told her stories of distant lands. But another part, the part that had survived on her own for so many years, questioned everything. Had he been lying all along? Or was she simply too young to understand the weight of his choices? As the hours passed, the storm outside grew fiercer. Rain lashed against the windows, turning the ground outside into mud. Lightning illuminated the room in brief flashes, casting eerie shadows on the walls. She rose from her seat, unable to sit still any longer, and began pacing. Her boots creaked softly on the wooden floor, each step echoing in the silence. It was then that she noticed something odd, a loose board near the fireplace. Curiosity got the better of her, and she knelt down, pried away with her hands. Beneath it lay a small compartment, hidden from view. Inside was another letter, this one sealed with wax bearing the insignia of a hawk. Her breath caught in her throat as she broke the seal, unfolding the delicate parchment. The contents sent a jolt of fear through her body. It wasn't just plans for rebellion, it was proof. Proof that her father had been working with others, men whose names were whispered in fear throughout the territories, men who would stop at nothing to achieve their goals. And buried within the text was a chilling detail, a list of targets, including several prominent Union officers. Refusing to let panic take hold, she folded the letter carefully and placed it back in its hiding spot. If anyone found it, if the soldiers returned, they would see her as complicit, as guilty by association. No, she couldn't allow that. Not when she still didn't know the full truth. But then, little did she know, the truth was closer than she imagined. Just as the storm began to subside, a faint sound reached her ears, a rhythmic tapping, like someone knocking gently on wood. She froze, her senses sharpening. The noise came again, louder this time, emanating from the rear of the cabin. Slowly, cautiously, she made her way toward the source, her hand gripping the poker from the fireplace tightly. Peering through cracks in the wall, she saw a figure hunched over, trying to force open a trapdoor concealed beneath some old crates. Moonlight bathed the intruder in silvery light, revealing a face both weathered and determined. It was a woman, dressed in dark, clothing that blended with the shadows. When the trapdoor finally gave way, the woman disappeared inside, vanishing into the earth. Unbelievable courage surged through her veins. Without hesitation, she followed, lowering herself into the hidden passageway. The air was cool and damp, the walls lined with rough-hewn stone. Torches flickered sporadically along the path, casting dancing reflections on the surfaces. Footsteps echoed ahead, growing fainter as the woman moved deeper into the tunnel. "Wait!" she called out, her voice breaking the silence. The woman stopped abruptly, spinning around with lightning speed. In her hand gleamed a revolver, its barrel pointed directly at her chest. For a moment, neither spoke, the tension between them palpable. "You shouldn't be here," the woman said finally, her voice low and dangerous. "I could say the same about you," she replied, standing her ground despite the weapon aimed at her. "Who are you? What's going on?" The woman lowered her gun slightly, though not entirely. "My name is Clara, and as for what's going on," she hesitated, glancing behind her as if expecting someone else to appear. "This place isn't safe anymore. Not after what happened." "What happened?" she pressed, stepping closer. Clara sighed, holstering her revolver. "Your father trusted me. Trusted us all. But trust can be a fragile thing, especially when lives hang in the balance." Her eyes darkened, filled with pain and regret. "We were betrayed. By someone close. Someone we thought we could count on." Betrayal. The word struck a chord deep within her. Was it possible? Could her father have been duped by someone he considered an ally? Or worse, had he turned against his own people? Before she could ask more questions, Clara motioned for her to follow. "There's no time to explain everything now. We need to move. Now." Reluctantly, she obeyed, following Clara through the labyrinthine tunnels. Along the way, they passed numerous chambers, each filled with supplies, food, ammunition, even medical equipment. It was clear this wasn't just a hideout. It was a fortress built to withstand sieges and attacks. Finally, they emerged into a large cavern, its ceiling high enough to accommodate several wagons. In the center stood a group of people, their faces grim and resolute. Among them was a man she recognized instantly, not from memory, but from descriptions shared in hushed tones during her travels. He was tall, with piercing blue eyes and a scar running down his cheek. His presence commanded attention, even without words. "This is her?" the man asked, his gaze locking onto hers. Clara nodded. "Yes, Marcus. She's the daughter." Marcus studied her closely, his expression unreadable. "Tell me, girl, do you know why we're fighting?" She opened her mouth to respond, but no sound came out. How could she answer such a question? Did she truly understand the reasons driving these rebels? Or was she merely caught in the crossfire, a pawn in a game far larger than herself? But then, little did she know, the real battle hadn't even begun. The cavern fell silent, the weight of Marcus's question hanging heavy in the air. She stood there, under the scrutiny of a dozen pairs of eyes, each one burning with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. Her mind raced, searching for an answer that wouldn't condemn her, or them. I don't know, she admitted finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I only know what I've read in my father's letters. Freedom, justice. But she hesitated, the doubt she'd carried for so long bubbling to the surface. But at what cost? How many lives must be lost before we can claim victory? Marcus tilted his head, studying her as if trying to gauge the sincerity behind her words. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he nodded slowly. Good. You asked the right questions. Too many of us have forgotten to do so. Clara stepped forward, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. She's not like the others, Marcus. She hasn't been blinded by hatred or ambition. She sees the truth. Truth. The word echoed in her mind, but what was it exactly? Was it loyalty to family, even when they made choices she couldn't condone? Or was it standing up for what was right, no matter how difficult the path? As if reading her thoughts, Marcus turned to the group gathered around them. We face a challenge greater than any we've known before. The Union forces are closing in, their numbers swelling with each passing day. They suspect something is here, something buried deep within these tunnels. If they find it... His voice trailed off, but the implication hung heavy in the air. What exactly are they looking for? She asked, unable to contain her curiosity any longer. Marcus regarded her for a moment before answering. Something your father worked tirelessly to protect. Something that could shift the balance of power in this war forever. Her heart skipped a beat. What is it? It's called the Ember's Tone, Clara interjected, her tone laced with reverence. A mineral unlike anything else in the world. When processed correctly, it generates immense energy, enough to power entire cities or destroy armies. Destroy armies. The phrase sent a shiver down her spine. Such power in the wrong hands would mean catastrophe, not just for the rebels, but for everyone. But why go to such lengths to hide it? She pressed, needing to understand fully. Why not simply use it openly? Because its existence threatens both sides, Marcus explained grimly. The Union would exploit it for domination, while some among our ranks see it as a means to exact revenge. Neither outcome serves the cause of true freedom. That's why your father chose to safeguard it, to ensure it remained hidden until the time was right. Hidden, safeguarded, words that carried immense responsibility, especially now that she knew part of the burden rested on her shoulders. Yet, despite the gravity of the situation, a flicker of pride stirred within her. Her father hadn't abandoned her. He'd been fighting for ideals, for people, for a future he believed in. Before she could dwell further on those thoughts, the sound of distant hoofbeats shattered the stillness. Everyone froze, their heads snapping toward the entrance of the cavern. Clara immediately drew her revolver, her movements swift and practiced. Marcus raised a hand, signaling caution. "They're coming!" someone whispered, panic rising in their voice. "No," Clara corrected, her eyes narrowing. "They've already arrived." Sure enough, moments later, a soldier burst into the cavern, his uniform dusty and torn. Behind him followed several more, their weapons drawn and pointed directly at the group. In the dim light, their faces were unreadable, masks of determination and duty. "Federal forces," the lead soldier barked. "You are surrounded. Lay down your arms." For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then Marcus stepped forward, his presence commanding despite the odds stacked against him. "We surrender," he said calmly, though his eyes burned with defiance. "But know this, you may take our lives today, but you'll never take our cause." The soldiers exchanged glances, clearly surprised by the lack of resistance. One of them moved closer, his gaze sweeping over the assembled rebels. And then his eyes landed on her. You, he said, pointing a finger. You're the girl from the desert, the one who helped the mule. Her stomach churned. How had they connected her to all of this? Had they been watching her all along, tracking her every move? Take her, the soldier ordered, motioning to two of his comrades. Separate her from the rest. No, Clara shouted, stepping between them. Leave her alone. But it was too late. Strong hands grabbed her arms, pulling her away from the group. She struggled, kicking and twisting, but the soldiers held firm. As they dragged her deeper into the cavern, away from the others, she caught one last glimpse of Marcus. His expression was calm, almost serene, but his eyes conveyed a message she understood instantly. Stay strong. When they reached a secluded corner, the lead soldier turned to face her, his demeanor changing from authoritative to almost sympathetic. Listen carefully, he said, lowering his voice. We know about the Ember's Tone. We've been tracking its location for months. What we don't know is where it's hidden, and we believe you might hold the key. I don't know anything, she protested, though her voice wavered. I swear, I didn't even know about it until now. He studied her for a long moment, his jaw tightening. That may be true, but whether you realize it or not, you're connected to this. Your father trusted you with something important, something we need to stop a disaster far greater than you can imagine. Unbelievable pressure weighed on her chest. Was it possible? Could her father have entrusted her with knowledge she wasn't yet aware of? A memory surfaced. A childhood game, hiding treasures in the woods near their old home. He'd always told her, remember, little one, sometimes the best place to hide something is in plain sight. Could that clue lead her to the Ember's Tone? And if so, would revealing it save lives or seal their fates? But then, little did she know, the real test of courage was yet to come. The soldier's words hung in the air, heavy with implication. She stared at him, her mind racing as she tried to piece together the fragments of memory and suspicion swirling within her. Her father's voice echoed faintly in her thoughts, a whisper from the past urging her to remember, to seek out what had been hidden in plain sight. Plain sight, she murmured under her breath, the phrase sparking a flicker of recognition. The soldier raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued by her reaction. What did you say? He asked, leaning closer. She shook her head, dismissing the thought outwardly, but allowing it to take root internally. If her father had indeed left her a clue, it would be subtle, something only she could recognize. But where to begin? The cabin seemed the most logical starting point, yet the soldiers had already searched it thoroughly. Unless there was something they had missed. Her gaze shifted to the soldiers surrounding her, their faces masks of anticipation and wariness. They awaited her next move, her next word, with bated breath. Yet, despite their vigilance, she noticed a detail that might work in her favor. Their focus was entirely on her, leaving the cavern's other occupants largely unguarded. "Take me back to the cabin," she said suddenly, surprising even herself with the boldness of her request. "If I'm to help you find this Ember's Tone, then perhaps the answers lie there." The soldier hesitated, his hand instinctively moving to the hilt of his sword. "And why should we trust you?" "Because," she replied, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside, "if I wanted to harm you or your cause, don't you think I'd have done so already? Instead, I'm offering my assistance, not because I agree with you, but because I want to understand the truth." His eyes narrowed, searching for any sign of deceit. After a long moment, he nodded curtly. "Fine, but know this. If you try anything suspicious, you won't live to see another sunrise." With that, he motioned for two of his men to escort her back to the cabin while the rest remained behind to guard the captured rebels. As they marched through the labyrinthine tunnels, the weight of their stares pressed upon her shoulders. She forced herself to walk steadily, her mind working furiously. When they emerged into the open air, the storm had passed, leaving behind a crisp, cool night. The stars shone brightly above, their light casting soft shadows across the desert landscape. The cabin loomed ahead, its silhouette stark against the darkened sky. Upon arrival, the soldiers pushed her inside, their weapons drawn and ready. Inside, the familiar scent of wood and ash filled her nostrils. The papers and belongings she had left scattered earlier were still in disarray, evidence of the soldiers' earlier search. She moved toward the table, her fingers brushing against the edges of the documents, searching for anything out of place. Then she saw it, a small scratch on the surface of the wooden tabletop, barely noticeable unless one knew where to look. It formed the shape of an arrow, pointing downward. Her heart quickened. Could this be the clue? She dropped to her knees, examining the floor beneath the table. There, partially concealed by the legs of the furniture, was another loose board. Carefully, she pried it away, revealing yet another hidden compartment. Inside lay a small leather pouch, its contents glinting faintly in the dim light. The soldiers closed in immediately, their guns trained on her. "What is that?" the lead soldier demanded. She held up the pouch, her hands trembling slightly. "I don't know," she admitted, though her instinct screamed otherwise. Slowly, she untied the drawstring, spilling the contents onto her palm. Tiny shards of crystal-like material caught the light, their surfaces shimmering with an otherworldly glow. "It's the ember's tone," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The soldiers exchanged stunned glances. One of them reached for the crystals, but she pulled them away instinctively. "Wait," she cried. "We don't know what will happen if they're handled improperly. My father warned about this. It must be approached with caution." Reluctantly, the soldier stepped back, his expression torn between admiration and suspicion. "You've proven resourceful," he admitted grudgingly. "But now, we must decide what to do with this discovery." As they debated their course of action, she found herself reflecting on the journey that had led her here, from the injured mule in the desert to uncovering secrets buried deep within her own family's history. Each step had brought her closer to understanding not just her father's choices, but her own role in this tangled web of loyalty, duty, and survival. But then, little did she know, the true test of her resolve was only beginning. For as the soldiers argued amongst themselves, a distant sound reached her ears, a low rumble, growing louder with each passing second. It wasn't thunder. It was far too deliberate, too mechanical. Her blood ran cold as realization dawned. Whatever forces her father had fought against, and whatever forces sought to claim the Emberstone, were closing in faster than anyone had anticipated. And in that moment, she understood. The battle for the future of the Wild West was no longer confined to whispers and shadows. It was here, now, unfolding before her very eyes.